I'm Miguel Roti. Stay with us to witness this story in Latin paranormal archives. Tonight, we delve into the shadows of Latin America, a land rich with ancient myths and terrifying folklore. We're talking about creatures that stalk the night, beings that blur the line between animal and demon, legend and chilling reality. Tonight, we speak of the black dog. Not just any dog, but a spectral hound, an omen, a guardian, or perhaps something far more sinister. These aren't just campfire tales. These are encounters that have left witnesses trembling, their lives forever marked by a glimpse into the abyss. The sheer terror of facing an entity that defies all known laws of nature, an entity that seems to emerge from the very fabric of nightmares, is a profound experience that few ever truly recover from. You see, across the vast and varied landscapes of Latin America, from the dense jungles of Central America to the windswept plains of Argentina, stories persist of a creature that embodies primal fear. It's known by many names: El Cadejo, El Perro Negro, the black dog of the Pampas. But its description is eerily consistent. A massive, often silent canine, with fur as dark as midnight and eyes that burn with an unholy crimson glow. The sheer size, the unnatural silence, the malevolent gaze. These are the hallmarks of an entity that defies conventional explanation, a creature that seems to exist solely to instill dread. It's a recurring motif in the continent's dark tapestry of legends, a chilling reminder that some fears are universal. Our first story takes us to the heart of Central America, where the legend of El Cadejo has been whispered for centuries. This isn't a single entity, but rather a pair, one white, one black. The white Cadejo is said to be a benevolent spirit, protecting travelers from harm, guiding them safely home through treacherous paths. But it's the black Cadejo that truly captures the imagination and the fear of those who encounter it. This creature is a harbinger of misfortune, a malevolent spirit that leads the unwary astray, or worse, to their doom. It's a trickster, a tormentor, and sometimes a killer. Its presence a chilling omen of impending tragedy. The folklore suggests that once you've seen the black Cadejo, your fate is sealed, or at the very least, irrevocably altered. In the early 1970s, in a small, isolated village nestled deep within the mountains of Guatemala, a young woman named Elena Ramirez knew these legends well. Elena, barely 20 years old, often walked the winding, unlit paths between her village and the nearest town, where she worked selling handmade textiles. It was a journey she had made countless times, always with a sense of unease after dusk, but never with true fear, until one night. The path was treacherous, uneven, and often shrouded in mist, making the journey even more daunting after sunset. The dense foliage pressed in on both sides, creating a tunnel of darkness that felt both ancient and suffocating. It was a moonless evening in October of 1973. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke, a familiar comfort that was soon to be shattered. Elena had stayed later than usual in town, finishing an order, and now the darkness was absolute, save for the faint glow of her small lantern, which seemed to shrink the encroaching shadows rather than dispel them. As she walked, the familiar sounds of the jungle, the chirping of insects, the rustling of leaves, the distant calls of nocturnal birds, seemed to grow unnaturally quiet. A profound silence descended, heavy and suffocating, as if the very air had been sucked out of the world around her, leaving only a vacuum of dread. This sudden, eerie quiet was the first, undeniable sign that something was terribly wrong, a prelude to the horror that awaited. Suddenly, a pair of eyes, like burning coals, materialized out of the inky blackness ahead. They were low to the ground, too low for a deer, too large for a coyote. Elena froze, her heart hammering against her ribs, a cold dread seizing her entire being. The eyes belonged to something immense, something that slowly began to take shape as it moved closer, its form coalescing from the shadows. It was a dog, but unlike any she had ever seen, its fur was matted and black, absorbing what little light her lantern cast, making it appear as a moving void. Its size was staggering easily the height of a small pony, and its form seemed to shimmer at the edges, as if not entirely solid, almost like a distortion in the air itself, a creature not fully anchored to this reality. It moved without a sound, its massive paws making no impression on the dirt path, no rustle of leaves, no crunch of gravel. Eleanor could feel a cold dread creeping up her spine, a primal terror that told her this was no ordinary animal. This was El Cadejo. Its glowing red eyes fixed on her, and she felt an overwhelming sense of despair, a crushing weight that threatened to steal her breath, to extinguish her very will. She tried to scream, but no sound escaped her throat, her vocal cords paralyzed by fear. She tried to run, but her legs were rooted to the spot, heavy and unresponsive, trapped by an unseen force. The creature's presence was suffocating, a tangible weight of ancient malice that pressed down on her, threatening to crush her spirit. The creature simply stood there, blocking her path, its silent presence radiating an ancient, malevolent power that seeped into her bones. Elena closed her eyes, praying to every saint she knew, begging for deliverance, for the nightmare to end, for the dawn to break. The seconds stretched into an eternity, each one filled with the silent, terrifying presence of the beast. When she finally dared to open them again, the eyes were gone. The immense, shadowy form had vanished as silently as it appeared, leaving behind only the oppressive quiet and the lingering, acrid scent of sulfur. A smell often associated with demonic entities. A foul reminder of what had just transpired. The air still felt heavy, charged with an unseen, malevolent energy, a residue of its terrifying visit. Eleanor stumbled the rest of the way home, collapsing at her doorstep, barely able to recount her terrifying ordeal, her voice a mere whisper. Her family, steeped in the local folklore, knew exactly what she had seen. It was the black Cadejo, and its appearance was never a good sign. For weeks, Eleanor was plagued by nightmares, haunted by those burning red eyes, waking in a cold sweat, the acrid smell of sulfur still in her nostrils. She never walked that path alone at night again, forever scarred by the encounter. The experience left an indelible mark, a chilling reminder that some legends are far more real than we dare to imagine, and that the darkness holds secrets far beyond our comprehension. Secrets that can reach out and touch you, even in the modern world. Now, if the Cadejo represents a duality, a balance between good and evil, our next encounter plunges us into something far more unequivocally sinister. We travel south to the vast and often desolate landscapes of Argentina, where the legend of El Perro Negro, or the Black Dog, is a chilling fixture of rural folklore. Unlike the Cadejo, El Perro Negro is almost universally seen as a malevolent entity, a harbinger of death, or even a demonic manifestation. It is a creature of pure, unadulterated evil, a predator that delights in terror, a spectral beast that stalks the lonely and the lost. Its reputation precedes it, whispered in fearful tones across generations. Our story unfolds in the late 1980s, in the remote, windswept region of the Argentine Pampas. This is a land of endless horizons, where isolated ranches dot the plains, and the silence can be profound, almost deafening, broken only by the howl of the wind or the distant lowing of cattle. The vastness itself can be unsettling, a place where one feels utterly alone, vulnerable to whatever ancient horrors might stir in the shadows. Carlos Sanchez, known locally as El Viejo, the old man, was a gaucho, a seasoned cowboy who had spent his entire life working the land. He was a man of few words, hardened by the elements, and skeptical of most superstitions, believing only in what he could see and touch. But even El Viejo, with all his practicality, had heard the whispers of El Perro Negro, stories told in hushed tones around campfires, tales of inexplicable terror that even the bravest gauchos dared not dismiss entirely. It was a cold, blustery night in July of 1989. Carlos was returning to his ranch after checking on a distant herd of cattle, a routine task that usually brought him a sense of peace. The journey was long, and the darkness was absolute, broken only by the faint starlight and the occasional flash of distant lightning on the horizon, illuminating the endless plains for a fleeting moment. His horse, a sturdy mare named Luna, was usually calm and sure-footed, a reliable companion, but tonight she was agitated, snorting and shying at unseen shadows, her ears twitching nervously, her muscles tense. Carlos tried to soothe her, attributing her nervousness to the approaching storm, but a knot of unease began to form in his gut, a premonition of something far worse than bad weather. As they rode, a strange, guttural growl echoed from the darkness beside the path. It was a sound that seemed to vibrate through the very ground, a sound that spoke of ancient, predatory power. A sound that was not animalistic in any natural sense, but rather something primordial and deeply unsettling. Luna reared violently, nearly unseating Carlos, her eyes wide with terror, whinnying in pure panic, her hooves scrabbling at the earth. Carlos, a man who had faced down stampedes and wild animals without flinching, felt a cold knot of fear tighten in his stomach, a fear he hadn't known since childhood. He drew the old rifle he always carried, his knuckles white around the stock, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs, a drumbeat of pure terror. Then, it emerged from the tall, dry grass. A dog. But not just any dog. This creature was immense, larger than any wolf, its coat a deep, impenetrable black that seemed to absorb all light, making it a moving void in the night, a hole in reality. Its eyes, like those of the Cadejo, glowed a malevolent, fiery red, burning with an intense predatory hunger fixed solely on Carlos. But unlike Elena's encounter, this creature was not silent. It snarled, a low, rumbling sound that promised violence. A sound that seemed to come from the very depths of hell, a sound that chilled Carlos to the bone. Its teeth, long and sharp, glinted in the faint light like polished daggers ready to tear flesh. El Perro Negro stalked towards them, its movements fluid and powerful, yet somehow unnatural, too smooth, too deliberate, as if it defied the very ground it walked upon. It seemed to glide over the uneven terrain, its massive form radiating an aura of pure, unadulterated evil, a palpable sense of malice that made the air grow cold, stealing the warmth from Carlos's body. Carlos aimed his rifle, his hands trembling despite himself, his breath catching in his throat, a desperate prayer forming on his lips. He fired. The shot cracked through the night, a deafening sound in the profound silence that followed. But the creature didn't flinch. The bullet seemed to pass right through its shadowy form, leaving no mark, no ripple, as if it were made of smoke, an illusion, or something far more terrifyingly insubstantial. A chilling, almost human-like laugh seemed to emanate from the dog. A sound that sent shivers down Carlos's spine. A sound of pure, mocking glee. A sound that echoed the deepest fears of his soul. It lunged. Carlos, in a desperate act of self-preservation, spurred Luna forward with all his might, screaming at her to run. The horse, terrified beyond anything she had ever experienced, bolted, galloping wildly across the Pampas, her hooves pounding the earth in a desperate flight, a frantic rhythm of survival. Carlos clung on for dear life, his body aching, glancing back to see the glowing red eyes of El Perro Negro pursuing them, keeping pace with Luna's frantic gallop, its form a dark blur against the night, never losing ground a relentless, terrifying shadow. They rode for what felt like an eternity, the spectral hound relentlessly at their heels, its chilling presence a constant, suffocating weight that pressed down on Carlos, threatening to crush him. Just as Carlos felt his strength failing his grip on Luna, his mane weakening, and the dog seemed to gain ground, its red eyes drawing closer, a faint light appeared on the horizon, the lights of his ranch, a beacon of hope in the terrifying darkness. As they drew closer, the black dog suddenly stopped. It stood motionless for a moment, its red eyes burning with a final lingering malevolence, a promise of future encounters, then turned and vanished back into the darkness of the Pampas, dissolving into the night, as if it had never been there. It left Carlos and Luna gasping for breath, drenched in sweat and fear, their bodies trembling uncontrollably, forever marked by the encounter. Carlos Sanchez never spoke much of that night, not in detail, but the experience changed him profoundly. He became even more withdrawn, his eyes holding a haunted look, forever marked by the encounter. A man who had seen the face of true evil. He knew what he had seen was not of this world, and the memory of those burning red eyes and that chilling laugh would forever be etched into his soul, a permanent scar. The legend of El Perro Negro, the demonic hound of the Pampas, was not just a story. It was a terrifying reality that roamed the lonely plains, a predator of the night, seeking out those who dared to trespass on its domain. a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurks just beyond the edge of our perception, waiting for its next victim. Sometimes, these dark legends seem to adapt, to evolve with the times, or perhaps they were always there, merely waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. Our next story takes us to a bustling city, a place where ancient beliefs often clash with modern skepticism, where the concrete jungle meets the echoes of forgotten gods. We travel to Mexico City, a metropolis built upon layers of history, where the veil between worlds can sometimes feel incredibly thin, a city where the past constantly brushes against the present. Here, the legends of spectral dogs often intertwine with the broader folklore of La Llorona, or even the pre-Hispanic beliefs in underworld guardians, creatures that guard the thresholds between life and death, between the mundane and the supernatural. In the early 2000s, Sofia Vargas, a university student studying anthropology, was fascinated by these local legends. She spent her evenings researching ancient Aztec myths and contemporary urban legends, often venturing into older parts of the city to interview residents, meticulously documenting their oral traditions and personal accounts. She considered herself a rationalist, viewing these stories as cultural artifacts, fascinating but ultimately products of human imagination, tales meant to explain the unexplainable or to instill moral lessons. That perspective, however, was about to be severely tested, and her rational worldview shattered by an encounter that defied all logic and reason. It was a humid summer night in August of 2004. Sophia was walking home after a late study session at the university library, a route she knew intimately. Her path took her through a quiet, tree-lined street in a historic neighborhood, usually well lit, but tonight several streetlights were out, plunging sections into deep shadow, creating pockets of oppressive darkness. The air was heavy, still, and a strange quiet had fallen over the usually bustling city street, a silence that felt unnatural and foreboding. As she passed an old, crumbling colonial building, its ancient stones seeming to absorb the light, she heard a low, mournful whine. It sounded like a dog in distress, a sound that tugged at her empathy, compelling her to investigate. Concerned, Sophia paused, peering into the darkness, her anthropologist's curiosity momentarily overriding her caution, her mind searching for a logical explanation. She saw nothing. The whine came again, closer this time, and she felt a prickle of unease. It was too deep, too resonant for a stray dog, almost like a sound that resonated from within the earth itself, a sound that vibrated in her very bones. Then, from the shadows beneath a large, ancient tree, its gnarled branches reaching like skeletal fingers, it emerged. A dog, undeniably. But its size was startling, easily the size of a German shepherd, yet far more muscular, with a coat of jet black that seemed to absorb the ambient light, making it appear as a whole in reality, a moving void. Its eyes, however, were the most disturbing feature. They were not red, like the Cadejo or El Perro Negro, but a sickly phosphorescent yellow, glowing with an unnatural intensity, like embers from a dying fire, or the eyes of a creature from another dimension. The dog moved slowly, deliberately towards her, its movements unnervingly smooth. It made no sound as its paws touched the pavement, no click of claws, no rustle of fur, yet Sophia could feel a heavy vibration in the air, a sense of immense power, a pressure that seemed to distort the very space around it. It wasn't snarling, wasn't aggressive in the way a normal dog would be. Instead, it simply stared, its yellow eyes conveying an ancient, chilling intelligence, a knowing gaze that seemed to pierce directly into her soul, stripping away her composure. Sophia felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead, her rational mind struggling to comprehend what her eyes were seeing, what her senses were screaming at her. This was not a stray. This was something else entirely, something ancient and malevolent, something that had no place in her understanding of the world. She tried to back away, slowly at first, then quickening her pace, her heart hammering against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear. The black dog mirrored her movements, maintaining the same distance, its glowing yellow eyes never leaving her. A silent, relentless pursuit that felt like a waking nightmare. She could hear her own ragged breathing, loud in the sudden, profound silence of the street. No cars passed, no distant city sounds reached her ears. It was as if the world had narrowed to just her and this terrifying, silent beast, trapped in a bubble of unreality, a pocket of pure dread. The air grew colder, heavier, with each step she took, a palpable chill that seeped into her bones. Panic began to set in, a primal, overwhelming fear that threatened to consume her, to paralyze her completely. Sophia broke into a run, sprinting down the street, her legs burning, her lungs screaming for air, her mind screaming for escape. She risked a glance over her shoulder. The black dog was still there, effortlessly keeping pace, its yellow eyes like twin beacons in the darkness, never faltering, never tiring, a silent, relentless shadow. It wasn't running, it was gliding, a nightmare given form, a creature of pure, unadulterated terror. She could feel its presence, a cold, oppressive weight pressing down on her, a suffocating dread that promised no escape, no respite. Just as she reached the corner of her street, her vision blurring with tears and exertion, a taxi rounded the bend, its headlights momentarily sweeping across the scene. In that sudden burst of light, the black dog shimmered, its form distorting, elongating, becoming translucent, then vanished completely, dissolving into the night as if it had never been there, leaving no trace. It left only the empty street and Sophia gasping for air, leaning against a lamppost, trembling uncontrollably, her body racked with residual terror, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. The sudden return of city sounds, the distant hum of traffic, felt jarring, almost alien after the profound silence she had endured. Sofia Vargas, the rationalist anthropologist, was changed forever by that night. She continued her studies, but with a newfound respect and fear for the stories she once dismissed as mere folklore. She never saw the black dog again, but the memory of those phosphorescent yellow eyes and the chilling, intelligent gaze haunted her for years, a constant, unsettling presence in her thoughts. It was a stark reminder that even in the heart of a modern city, ancient horrors can still lurk, waiting in the shadows, ready to challenge our understanding of reality and to remind us that some mysteries are best left undisturbed. For to encounter them is to be irrevocably altered. The truth is, these stories are not unique to specific regions. They are echoes of a universal fear, a primal understanding that some things exist beyond our comprehension, entities that defy the very laws of physics and biology. Our final story takes us to the majestic, yet often unforgiving landscape of the Peruvian Andes. Here, amidst ancient ruins and towering peaks, where the air is thin and the silence profound, the legends of spectral animals, often linked to the spirits of the mountains or even pre-Incan deities, are deeply ingrained in the local culture. The black dog of the Andes is a lesser-known but equally terrifying manifestation of this phenomenon, a creature born of the harsh, mystical environment, a sentinel of the high peaks. In the mid-1990s, Mateo Cruz, a young shepherd, lived with his family in a remote Andean village high above the sacred valley. His life was one of hard work and simple routines, tending to his flock of llamas and alpacas, a life dictated by the rhythms of nature and the demands of the unforgiving mountains. He was familiar with the local legends, tales of mountain spirits and mischievous imps, stories passed down through generations, meant to explain the unexplainable and to instill respect for the powerful forces of nature. But he had always dismissed the more frightening stories as old wives' tales, meant to keep children in line and ensure respect for the mountains. That night, however, would change his perspective forever, shattering his youthful skepticism. It was a cold, clear night in November of 1996. Mateo was out late, searching for a lost lamb that had strayed from the flock, a common occurrence, but one that always filled him with anxiety, as a lost animal meant a loss of livelihood. The air was thin and crisp, biting at his exposed skin, and the stars blazed with an intensity rarely seen in the lowlands, a dazzling canopy of light above the dark peaks, seemingly close enough to touch. He had climbed higher than usual, the familiar paths giving way to rocky, treacherous terrain, loose scree and jagged outcrops, the silence of the high altitude broken only by the whistling wind. A mournful, ancient sound. As he scanned the moonlit slopes, a movement caught his eye, a flicker of darkness against the pale rock. Perched on a jagged outcrop, silhouetted against the brilliant night sky, was a dog. It was enormous, its frame gaunt and skeletal, yet powerfully built, a creature of raw, untamed strength, perfectly adapted to the harsh environment. Its fur was a dull, dusty black, almost blending into the shadows of the rocks, making it difficult to discern its exact form. A master of camouflage. But its eyes were not red or yellow, but a piercing, icy blue, glowing with an unnatural, almost predatory light, like chips of frozen starlight. Or the eyes of an ancient, malevolent god. It was completely still, watching him, its gaze unwavering, ancient and utterly devoid of warmth. A gaze that seemed to penetrate his very soul. Mateo felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air, a cold that seeped into his bones, a primal fear. This dog was too large, too silent, too perfectly still. It radiated an ancient, predatory patience, a sense of timelessness that spoke of something far older than any living creature, something that had existed since the mountains themselves. He knew instinctively that this was not a normal animal. This was the black dog of the Andes, a creature whispered about in hushed tones, said to be a guardian of forgotten places, or perhaps a hunter of lost souls, a sentinel of the desolate peaks, a bringer of doom. Its presence was a heavy, suffocating weight in the thin mountain air, making it even harder to breathe. He tried to move, to retreat, to break free from its hypnotic gaze, but his legs felt heavy, as if rooted to the frozen earth, paralyzed by an unseen force, by the sheer terror of the moment. The dog remained motionless, its icy blue eyes fixed on him, and Mateo felt an overwhelming sense of being judged, of being weighed and found, wanting a profound feeling of dread and vulnerability, as if his very existence was being scrutinized by an ancient entity. He could hear the frantic beating of his own heart, loud in the profound silence of the high Andes, a silence that seemed to amplify his terror, making every beat a thunderclap. The wind seemed to whisper ancient warnings around him, carrying the echoes of forgotten spirits. Suddenly, the dog let out a single, piercing howl. It was a sound that seemed to tear through the fabric of the night, echoing off the distant peaks, a sound filled with ancient sorrow and chilling malice. A lament and a threat all at once, a sound that resonated with the very soul of the mountains. The howl seemed to drain the warmth from Mateo's body, leaving him numb and disoriented, his mind reeling from the sheer, unearthly power of the sound, a sound that promised despair. He stumbled backward, losing his footing on the loose scree, tumbling down a short, steep incline, his body protesting with every painful impact, every scrape and bruise. When he finally came to a stop, bruised and shaken, his head throbbing, his body aching, he looked back up at the outcrop. The dog was gone. The jagged peak was empty, silhouetted once more against the indifferent stars, as if the creature had never been there at all, a phantom of the night. Mateo scrambled to his feet, ignoring his injuries, the pain a distant echo compared to the terror in his heart, and fled down the mountain, not stopping until he reached the safety of his village. Collapsing at his doorstep, gasping for breath, his lungs burning, his mind scarred, Mateo Cruz never found his lost lamb that night. But he found something far more profound and terrifying, a direct encounter with the inexplicable. He became a changed man, his youthful skepticism replaced by a deep, abiding respect for the unseen forces that inhabit the mountains. A man who now understood that some legends are terrifyingly real. He would often tell his children and grandchildren about the night he saw the black dog of the Andes, its icy blue eyes, and its soul-piercing howl, a story that served as a grim reminder of the ancient, untamed power that still lurks in the wild places of the world, a power that demands respect and instills fear, a power that can shatter your reality. These stories, from the protective yet terrifying Cadejo, to the demonic Perro Negro, the intelligent urban phantom, and the ancient Andean guardian, paint a consistent picture. A creature of darkness, with glowing eyes, immense size, and an unnerving silence, or a terrifying howl. They appear, they terrify, and they vanish, leaving behind only fear and unanswered questions. They are not mere animals, they are something else entirely. Something that transcends our understanding of the natural world, a glimpse into the abyss. Are they cryptids, undiscovered species of canines, hiding in plain sight, masters of illusion? Are they interdimensional beings, slipping through the veil between worlds, glimpsed only by chance, leaving behind only terror? Or are they something far older, echoes of ancient deities? Or perhaps even manifestations of our deepest, most primal fears, given form by collective belief, by the very energy of human dread? The truth, like the creatures themselves, remains shrouded in mystery, lurking just beyond the edge of our understanding, a constant, chilling presence in the folklore of Latin America, a reminder of the vast unknown. The legends of the Black Dog continue to haunt the landscapes of Latin America, a chilling testament to the enduring power of the unknown. They remind us that, even in our modern world, there are still places where the old stories hold sway, where the darkness holds secrets, and where a pair of glowing eyes might be the last thing you ever see, a final, terrifying glimpse into the abyss, a moment that will forever define your understanding of fear. Thank you for joining us on this chilling journey into the unknown. If these stories have sent shivers down your spine, or if you've had your own encounters with the unexplained, we want to hear about it. Please like this video, subscribe to Latin Paranormal Archives for more terrifying true stories, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next dive into the darkness. If you have a story of a black dog or any other paranormal encounter you'd like us to investigate, share it in the comments below. We love a good horror story around a campfire in the dark forest, and we're always looking for new mysteries to unravel. Until next time, stay safe and keep an eye on the shadows.